Poke. I'll shut up now. Welcome to another episode of Mount and Blade Ultimate Guide, where today we are going to talk about polearms! Exciting. The polearm is indeed the longest melee weapon, and today I'm going to talk to you about 3 different types of polearms, and when you should be using them, and where you should be using them, etc. The first category of polearms we're going to talk about is the spear or the pike. It's generally optimized for a forward stabbing motion because it's, well, a spear. However, spears and pikes are usually not good in any circumstance because the forward stabbing motion you only use for stopping a horse. It's very bad when you use it as an infantry weapon when you fight other infantry, and generally other polearms can use a forward stabbing motion as well, so you don't really need that forward stabbing motion that comes from the spear or the pike. So generally, do not buy a spear or a pike. Of course, having a bunch of pikemen to stop horses is still a okay idea, but don't equip yourself with a pike or a spear. They're naturally pretty crappy. The next weapon we're going to talk about is the lance. It's generally the most deadly out of the 3 weapons because a whole bunch of lancers can totally rape an army. The lance is good for, of course, a forward stabbing motion. A spear or a pike is good for. However, the lance is optimized for using on top of a horse. The other option on a lance, aside from a forward stabbing motion, is what we call a couch lance. And basically how a couch lance works is if you have a horse and you go a certain speed and you're using a lance, if it's on automatic, then the lance automatically points forward, and if you hit somebody with that lance, you do tremendous damage. See here, I do like 300, perhaps even more damage to a person if I hit them with a lance. Of course, a lance should generally, when you buy a lance, you should generally find speed or range over the amount of damage a lance does, because the couch lance more than makes up for the amount of damage. 300 is just overkill. If you do 100 damage with the lance, it's perfectly okay, and it still kills a lot of people. So if you are looking for a lance, look for a long lance instead of looking for a high damage lance. Also, it used to be in the old Mount and Blade, if you played the original Mount and Blade, that you could couch lance with any weapon, which was kind of cheap because you could have, like, say, a very powerful polearm that you can use on the foot, and then you can just climb up on a horse and couch lance people, which just made it extraordinarily cheap to be a lancer. So they nerfed that kind of in Mount and Blade Warband, and in Fire and Sword you can only use specific lances. I'm pretty sure it has to have lances in its name in order for you. It means you can couch lance that particular weapon. However, lances aren't exactly the best infantry weapon. If you have a lance, it's basically the same thing as a spear, which just doesn't work at all on foot. So don't use a lance on foot. If your horse gets couch lanced, or if your horse gets killed, then pull out a sword, pull out, like a bow, anything. It's better than a lance. Polearm numero 3. I'm probably not saying that right, but anyways. So the third polearm we're going to talk about is the halberd. The halberd is optimized for foot combat, and it's generally used by footmen. You can't really use a halberd very well on a horse because it has a forward. You can only use polearms in a forward stabbing motion on a horse. However, a halberd isn't optimized for forward stabbing motions. Generally, there is no piercing on the halberd at all. It's just a blunt tip, which makes it very weak for a horseman weapon. However, the halberd completely rapes on foot. If you use a halberd, halberds are generally about 180 or over. It's between the length of a lance and a spear. On foot, it usually is the longest weapon. It's also pretty good to use against horsemen. You can use a halberd for that forward stabbing motion just to stop a horse, not per se to kill the horse, but to stop the horse. The halberd usually has very good very good cutting motion. It usually has about 40 or over cut, and that cut lets you use that halberd to its max extent, whether you're jumping up to hit a horseman or whether you're fighting with a footman with the halberd. However, you kind of have to make generally for all polearms, it's kind of hard to use in siege combat because you don't really have that space to swing the polearm around, and your polearm's gonna get stuck on a wall or something like that. But in the open field, the halberd is a very efficient weapon. It has long length and has heavy damage. Generally, when you look for a halberd, don't just look for the range, also look for the speed, because it is a footman's weapon, and the range gets you, if you saw my other videos, the range gets you the first hit, the speed gets you the continuous damage per second. So you kind of have to judge whether or not you want speed over damage over length. So you kind of have to look at that. When you choose a halberd, it's generally harder to choose than a lance or a spear, but the halberd is a very good weapon. If you're planning to be a footman, it's always good to have a halberd around. So yeah, that is all for this episode of Mount and Blade Ultimate Guide. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you learned something from this. And if you didn't, if you still don't know something, please feel free to message or comment me on this video in the comment section below. As always, rate, comment, subscribe. Bye-bye.